So we have about 23 who have logged in.
That's a
Others
good
will
crowd on a Friday evening, though.
Friday evening. Yes, yes. Shall we commence? Indika, are we good to go?
Yes, we are good to go. We are on live.
All right. So good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all. So today we commence the first session in our series of webinars delivered by CISOs for CISOs or budding CISOs or those who want to function as their cybersecurity advisors or leaders in their organizations. So the first topic of this webinar, the first webinar is about the evolving role of the CISO. And we have an expert or a stalwart in industry to deliver the content today. So he's Sujit Christie. Actually needs no introduction. You can see from the slide all his qualifications. He is, of course, so I'm not going to talk about the information on the slides. You can read it for yourself. But what I want to say is he has been an auditor, a practitioner, but I think the role that he enjoys the most is the role of teacher. So he's an educator, and when we organized this series, I specifically wanted Sujit to kick off these sessions because he's the most experienced cybersecurity professional, I believe, in Sri Lanka. So with that, I would like to invite Sujit to make his presentation. Of course, we have a chat box and a Q&A. And while he's delivering his presentation, we will try to keep it informal or kind of a discussion. So you may pose questions during his PowerPoint presentation, and I will present it to him during the presentation. So I hope that's okay, Sujit.
Yeah,
we will
perfectly
keep it like a discussion.
Yes,
so if
absolutely.
a question pops up, if you need any clarification, Indik and I will be asking him questions throughout. And I invite you also to do the same. So we will start it now. It's 6:08 or 6:10. We will finish the sessions sharp at 7. So thank you. With that, I would like to invite Sujit to deliver his presentation. Thank you, Sujit. Over to you.
Thank you, Ashin. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you for that warm and kind introduction. I appreciate it a lot. Right. And it's again a great pleasure to be. It's like coming back home after 2 years. And this is my first presentation for ISACA after the last 2 years, right? I've been away. So it brings a lot of good memories. And as always, right? I mean, I get the chance to present first, and this is no difference here, right? So I want to thank you and the ISACA board for the confidence and the opportunity.
So for those of you who are not aware, Sujit has been a board member of ISACA and has been playing a very pivotal role in our CISA classes that we organize. Sujit, I hope you can remember, you were one of the pioneers starting these small group classes for nothing. You didn't get anything in return, just the fact that, you've transferred all this knowledge to your students and sharing. I suppose that's what you like the most.
Absolutely. And I think what we earned is this community, right? From about 7 members in 2003, I can't remember what the count is. I'm sure it's over 1,000 now, right? At least that's what we have produced out of Sri Lanka. So that's what we can always cherish, Ashin. And I think together we have done that in terms of giving back to the community.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, I think that's something much more than the money can provide you, right? The connections, the network, and the professional community which you have created. And I think that's a treasure which we can always cherish.
And Sujit, we actually, you will be happy to know that all our lecturers at the moment who teach CISA, all these certifications are your students.
Oh, really?
So yeah, they're all your students. So it's great work. You set a good foundation.
Thank you so much. It's great to know. So, Ashin, so I'm sure that there are people joining in. So, as Ashin mentioned, I would like to keep this casual, more conversational like. So, to talk about the evolution of these CISOs, and that was a topic which was given to me. How have the CISOs evolved? A couple of days ago, I spoke to Ashin and also to Indika, and Indika asked me, "Do you remember the name of the first CISO?" So I kind of nodded, and I thought I should go refresh my memory. And before I tell you who this first CISO was, I'd like you to look at this slide on your screen. Look at the date, 1995. And what did Citi lose? $10 million. So there was a breach which took place in 1994, from June 1994 to October 1994. 40 transactions were made, totaling over 10 million US dollars. And the monies were transferred to countries like Finland, Russia, Germany, Netherlands, US, Israel, and Switzerland. And I think we keep hearing about the same stories again and again, isn't it? Every year, every time you look at a report, every time you hear about an incident, you hear about that, right? And if we go back to a couple of years back, we also heard a similar story with the Bank of Bangladesh heist. Same situation. But this happened in 1994. The interesting thing is, Citi had a system where they were able to detect this, but it was not fast enough. So in result, they lost, out of the 10 million plus US dollars, they lost only 400,000. And this was committed by two young individuals who happened to be based in Russia. This particular incident also became public. And how did the public get to know about this? Because when Citi detected this, they got FBI involved, and FBI was on the trails of the money, right? So they were following the money. And when they arrested the first person in the US, because this person had set up a bank account in one of the local banks, and when he went to withdraw the money, they arrested him. And then he cooperated with FBI, and he was able to tell them how it was done and who the other people were. So FBI worked with the Department of Justice, and they wanted to extradite this specific individual who was based in London. So when it became a court case, and naturally, there's a public disclosure and everybody got to know. So what did Citi do? Citi said, let's find somebody to protect our information systems. So they looked around and they found the gentleman on the left, Steve Katz. And at that time, he was working for JP Morgan. So they had a conversation, and he was brought in as the first CISO of the Citigroup. The interesting thing is, he was hired by the business, and he was not hired by the CIO. And the gentleman on the right has had the opportunity of working very closely with Steve. And he was working for AT&T. So at that point in time, they were talking about, or probably they were working with Bell Labs to build packet filters, more to do with the perimeter security. So when this gentleman wanted to he met Steve, and then they found the directors were both sitting in AT&T and city boards. They became friends, and he went to his boss and said, "Can I use the title Chief Information Security Officer?" So when you read the articles, where he goes on to say, while they said, okay, maybe, kind of like never got a direct answer, but they were all conscious or concerned about the word officer, but they allowed him to use. So if you read his articles, you would find that he calls himself the world's second CISO. So if you go and read about Steve, there are a lot of articles about him, and he would share a lot of insights. And one of the things I think he had discussed in an interview with Security Week is that specifically he talks about conflict. So most of the time, what happens is globally, you would notice that the CISOs and the CIOs end up having conflicts or difference of opinion. So in one instance, he narrates that the CIO wanted to roll out a specific service and he wanted to go ahead and do it. And Steve said, no. So the conversation became very aggressive. The CIO threatened to terminate him. And Steve goes on to say, not until he has had a word with the board.
Sujit, if I may just pause you there. Now,
Yeah.
in companies, the CISO, generally, who does he report to? Is it to the CIO, or functionally, what is the best reporting line?
Different organizations have different hierarchies, right?
Right.
Mature organizations, they would definitely have the CISO report directly to the board or a board nominated member in the senior management.
Not to the CEO.
Right. So if the CEO is the head of the organization, the person will direct report it to the CEO, administrate it.
Right.
And he will collaborate with the CIO. But
Right.
in most organizations, especially this part of the world, the challenge is in terms of experience and seniority. And sometimes it's a junior person and they may not have the necessary experience. So when I talk about experience, not from a technical aspect, it's about understanding the business, having the business dialogue. In that context, they may lack experience. So in that case, most of the time, they are made to report to a CIO.
Right, because I think today
Yeah.
you have the CISO needs to kind of move from a technical guy to a more of a business, strategic business role also has to be there, no? To some extent, they have to play
Absolutely.
that role. And that is the difficulty I think that CISOs face, given the lack of
Correct.
I said, knowledge and experience on the business aspect of it.
Absolutely. So when you actually read the articles about Steve, he when this incident happened, right, when this money was lost, guess what he did? He went and met his top 20 customers globally. So he went on a world tour. He went and told them that they had an incident, that they lost money. And he discussed with them as to what they were doing to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So he was basically talking about risk management, mitigation plans. And he also urged the customers to talk to their banks and ask them as to what they are doing from a security point of view. And this particular article, which I'm referring to from Security Week, he says most of the customers called back and said none of the banks were willing to talk security with him or with them, right? They didn't want to discuss as to what they were doing to secure their information systems and their money. So that's the difference, right? Everybody else looked at it technically, but Steve looked at it from a business point of view. So he was actually looking at it from a business enablement perspective and risk mitigation perspective. right?
So there has to be digital trust, I believe. That's what you're getting at.
Absolutely,
Customers need to
absolutely,
be trust the business
absolutely.
then, right?
Correct. Absolutely. So if the customers do not have that confidence, you're going to move on, right? And the biggest challenge today, they'll get to know very quickly if even if something goes wrong. It's how quickly we get to them and tell them firsthand, say this is what happened and how you're going to remediate. And I think that's what Steve did in this instance.
So
It
are
requires a
you,
lot of.
yeah, so are
Go
you
ahead.
telling me, Sujit, that CISOs more than the CISO serve the public interest?
Naturally, they are the stakeholders, aren't they?
More than the CIO, I believe.
Yes.
CISO has a more public interest role than the
Absolutely,
CIO in a
absolutely
sense.
correct. Right. I mean, I have a few slides, and I would,
Right.
talk at length on that. But to answer your question in one word, yes, because that's what the role is evolving to be, from a technical gatekeeper to provide that confidence to the businesses that what they are doing is right and it serves the best purposes for the organization. And this slide, you can actually see how the CISO roles have evolved, right? I mean, I got 6 phases here. So when you look at pre-2000, it was more technical. And I think many of us were not even thinking of being in the IT domain at that point in time, right? So we probably were still specializing in our own expertise or the subject which we were familiar with. But if you look at the phase two, 2000 to 2004, that's the time we had the dot-com bubble, right? So we had companies collapsing primarily because there were lack of compliance or lack of transparency, right? So that's the time Sarbanes-Oxley Act came into play. Various other regulatory requirements came in, and the Exchange Commission, the Security Exchange Commission in the US, mandated that they needed to ensure compliance, right? And the CISOs were required to do compliance at that point in time. And then when you look at 2004 to 2008, it was more to do with risk-oriented role, right? The CISOs were asked to, look at more of technical risk. And that's the time we were talking about ISO 27000 controls, and COBIT was becoming familiar, popular around that time, right? So it was more control-driven, risk-based approach. But when you look at from 2008 to 2016, we transitioned to a threat-aware cybersecurity CISOs. And that's the time we started talking about social media, cloud, mobile, right? So every organization wanted to have a presence in social media. They wanted to go mobile first, cloud first. All this journey started in that phase. So the CISOs also had to transform to be able to address the risk arising from there. And then when you look at 2016 to 22, globally, we started seeing from GDPR to various privacy laws being enacted. Right. So while the Privacy Act talked about a data protection officer, there are two aspects. You're talking about data protection, and then you're also talking about cybersecurity. So the privacy officers are required to identify the data and say, hey, we need to protect this data. We need to ensure confidentiality. The CISOs come in and say, okay, what's the best way to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability? So the CISO's role has now changed. Like he has to be a technical person. He needs to understand compliance. He needs to understand the laws. He needs to become risk aware. And now looking at, then he becomes threat aware, and he also becomes privacy aware, right? So he's now like a Swiss Army knife, should be able to, handle different aspects of requirements, and all of them actually point to risk, different types of risk.
So Sujit, just a small question. So if
Go
you
ahead.
take the CISO's role today, so it includes all this, doesn't it?
Oh yes, of course. I mean, CISO can't say, I'm going to be totally technical. That's where the challenge is, and that's where the conflicts also arise. Because when you're talking to the business, all they were looking at is enablement, frictionless, get to the market quickly, and ensure compliance, security, risk mitigation. And all of them comes in, right? And then when you look at 22 to 27 plus, the landscape is completely different, right? We are talking about more integrations coming in. We have AI, machine learning, quantum computing. So the whole landscape is changing so rapidly. While the CIOs would look at transformation, the CISO's job is to ensure those transformations are done in a secure manner. Now, one of the questions I've been asked in several interviews when I actually sit down with my CISO and when both of us face the media in certain situations, and one of the questions they ask, how many times do you guys fight? Or how many
Fight
fights
with the
have you
business,
had?
you mean?
No,
Fight with the
fight with the
business, you mean?
CIO. Fight with the
Fight with the
CIO,
CIO. Okay.
right? So my response to that is, why would I have to fight with the CIO? Because if the CIO is going to set the vision and the strategy, then we are clear, okay, this is the long-term strategy. This is how things are going to evolve. As CISOs, what I need to do is to see how can I clear the path.
So
Sure.
just a small question again. Now,
Go
now
ahead.
CIOs generally are involved in managing the IT infrastructure. It can be the human element, the applications, the hardware, all that.
Correct.
So the conflicts would arise when they kind of try to implement, make an investment, and then when you look at the security aspects of it, there are
Absolutely.
deficiencies, and then you have to buy the tools. So that's where you see the conflict, is it?
That's where I see the conflict, right? In terms of the maturity of the technology, right? So rather than saying no, can we build guardrails,
Okay.
right? So that the business can transform in a calculated environment or in an environment which is protected without hindering the process of growth. Because one of the things which I keep advocating to everybody saying, okay, it's good to say that you need to have strong security. I was also talking to a friend of mine who is working for a company called Thales based out of Singapore. And the conversation was on passwords. So we all say passwords have to be long, complex, you name it. All the ingredients have to be there. So he had a very interesting analogy to discuss. He said, we can make things more secure, we can make it more complex. But from a user point of view, if it's going to be difficult and complex, they'll break it or they'll find shortcuts to bypass. So while we ensure that they adopt and accept what we say, but we also need to make it much more simpler. So let's take a mobile banking application or a banking application. There you can have several levels of controls, application controls, right? Or if you, let's say, you want to change the limit of money transfer, then you can say, okay, you need to authenticate multiple times to ensure that it is you who is making this thing. Just imagine if you're using LinkedIn or Facebook and you want to do a post, and if that pops up and says, prove you are Sujat Christie or prove it is Ashin Jaisekar, how would you react? So that's the maturity we need to bring to our conversations. So where do we strengthen and where do we say we relax? So we come to a stage where we cannot say one size fits all. That's where the profiling of assets, profiling of users, understanding the data, the type of processes you have, the kind of activities the businesses are doing, you need to become aware. Otherwise, this is going to be a constant challenge. The businesses will, with the internet being available, with AI being available, the users will find their own ways to get their deliverables done. So that's where the shadow IT creeps in.
So what
Yes,
you're
sir.
saying is it's a balancing act between risk management and enabling innovation and customer
Absolutely.
convenience and growth. So the
Correct.
CISO has to also to be flexible. No, he cannot just give
So,
one solution which
yes,
the others are using just to. customization.
Correct. Absolutely. So if you go back to like pre-2016, it was more technology-driven security, where we would say, do not access this, block it. Today, if you block it, I mean, even if you look at from an internet lockdown perspective, right? What the country says, what the government says, lock it down. What do the users do? They use a VPN, they bypass all the controls and go there. And little do they realize that there is a risk in that, right? They end up terminating all their communication in a hostile server. So their data is compromised, but they don't realize it. So that's where the conversation has to be. And it has to be an open, transparent conversation. Yeah. So then we move our conversation. The question the boards typically would ask, are we secure enough for our risk appetite? And if not, what actions do we need to take? Now, I'm sure there are several CISOs who are connected or aspiring CISOs out there. This is one question every board member is going to ask. And we also need to acknowledge not all board members are technical people. They are business people, they are accountants, they are process-driven people. So what's the answer you would give for this question? So this is something you need to go back and ask yourself, how would you respond to this question? So when you look at the boardroom expectations, right? So I have about 5 headline points, right? One of the things which they talk about is effective risk management. So when you do risk management, you also need to factor in the transparency and trust. Hashan, going back to your trust computing and digital trust. And we cannot do risk assessment once a year and say, oh, we have a risk register and everything is fine. Now, I was talking to my friends in Cisco 2 weeks ago. They were in Sri Lanka, they were meeting all their customers. And the president of Cisco, she actually asked everyone who was in that room, and there were CISOs and there were CIOs, what is long-term plan for you, or the duration? When you say long-term, what is it? Is it 36 months or is it 60 months? What is it? Ashin, I am going to ask you this question. And Indika, what in your mind is long-term?
I don't know, more than 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, perhaps. From an accounting perspective, I'm just
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what we are used to, right? Now,
Correct,
there have been
Sujit.
sorry, come again?
Correct, Sujit, because from a accounting and historic theory perspective, we look at maybe a 1 year or 2 year or 3 year time zone. But long term,
Absolutely.
maybe
Mostly it is 3 years, right? It's
correct.
this thing, and then it's broken down into smaller chunks. So there was a tech leadership conclave in San Francisco last month. And one of the people who were in that room was Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI. You know what his long-term duration is? 6 months. Think about it. If he says his long-term plan is 6 months, that in every 6 months, he's going to do something so different, how are the dependent ecosystems going to cope up with? Now, when you look at the tech giants, right? So they have a roadmap. They say, okay, these features are there in our roadmap. It'll come in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. They will tell you, okay, these features will be released in this time. But if OpenAI is saying that their long-term plan is 6 months, you can imagine what happens in the short term.
So
Put yours.
in Sri Lanka, it takes about 6 months to make a decision.
Oh,
It just shows that how quickly you have to kind of, it's so volatile out there, how
Correct.
quickly you have to make decisions and make investments, I suppose.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right. I mean, this is a very interesting statement, Ashin. I mean, when you said Sri Lanka, right? And I would like to bring Donovan Chia, my friend who I was talking to last week, and he had been to Japan. And would you believe that Japan, the economy works in trust. If you and I were to do business there, it's purely on trust. The companies which actually emphasize a lot on cybersecurity are multinationals and the financial institutions. The rest of the companies or institutions in Japan, they purely work on trust. Sometimes he was actually telling me, you go and tell them, the boards or the senior management saying, okay, you need to do this. They say, okay, when we meet in 2 weeks, let's make a decision. Right. So that 2 weeks, no, it gets extended. And individuals still use something similar to a rubber stamp. Right. So if you file an application with the government to change your address, you need to put your stamp. And today we are talking about digital signatures. So you can see, sometimes we think we are lagging behind, but an advanced country like Japan is also lagging behind. So that's where the perception changes, right? The risk appetite, the threat landscape. That's what I was talking about. If you look at the previous slide here, the CISOs have to become threat aware. Now, if let's say a CISO goes and tells the board, oh, there are threats, there are hackers out there, the boards are not going to understand what actually it means. So we need to translate that and convey in a manner how it would have an impact on the business. So that's what that point I'm talking about, right? Where effective risk management and communication, transparency and truth, where they're able to translate complex cybersecurity issues and relate it to business. And the next point I'm talking about, the board members have a personal liability. So how do we address that? How do we give assurance to them that the security strategy is aligned with the business goals, right? And support with clear metrics. So how many metrics have we defined, or how do we measure those things? And the boards also require assurance. I'm sure, Ashin, since you are providing assurance to the businesses, right, both from the financial and technology perspective, and even our engagements where we have been involved together. And I think every chairman or the CEO of the organization, what he had asked all of us, are we good? Isn't it? I still remember, Ashin, this was before COVID, right? When we were together in one of those debriefing sessions, the CEO asked the CIO, why didn't you tell us? Had you told us, we would have looked at it differently, right?
Yeah.
So I
I think,
guess,
yeah,
go
I
ahead,
think
Ashin.
the language of business is sometimes, or in most cases, is finance. It's cost. It's
Yes,
numbers.
correct,
And the CISO has a huge role to play in not only identifying the risk, but also making the business case. The business case
correct.
to convince the CEO that this would be the financial impact. Although this is going to be
Absolutely.
the cost, if something goes wrong, this will be the impact, and that has to be done in a very convincing manner. At the end of the day, it all comes down to numbers. Is it cost effective, or what do
Correct.
I stand to lose?
Absolutely. And also, Ashin, if you recall, I made a comment saying you can't do risk assessment once a year. The risk
Mm.
assessment is a continuous process, right? So do we appraise the boards in terms of the risk posture periodically? And if something in our landscape has changed, and I think that would trigger the conversation. So one of the things which I keep telling my friends and the people with whom I work very closely, you can't have an investment conversation if it has not found its place in your risk register. How can you go and ask for investment when you have not identified it as a risk? I'm sure you would also relate to what I'm saying, right? And most of the time they talk about a project, but when you look at the risk dashboard, nowhere mentioned, right? Yeah, Indika, you have something to say? Yeah, okay. And the
All
other
good.
one,
All
yeah,
good. I'm asking whoever participants here to raise their questions through the chat box. Then I can post to
yeah,
the.
please, yes. And the other one is the board actually wants to know is updates and findings and remediation, right? Every year, audits are done. Some findings are remediated immediately. Sometimes you would find the same issue keeps propping up in every audit. Repeat observations, right? So that also brings rise to a risk, right? So it could be a technology deficiency, it could be a process deficiency, or it can be a people-related issue. So I think today both the CIOs and the CISOs will have to sit down and ask themselves, okay, are we having a technology conversation or are we having a people-related conversation? So you can't use a standard process for all these things. So you need to address them separately to address your core issues. So that's one thing which, in my opinion, is an expectation of the board for the CISOs to independently report to the board saying, where are we in terms of the audit observations? Have we done it or are we falling behind? Or sometimes the audit scope is limited, then the CISOs will have to extrapolate and say, yep, this is found in this particular place. We have similar instances in multiple geographies or multiple instances. So we have this issue expanded to so many places. So we have to accept that and remediate that as well. So that visualization also is required to be provided to the board. Because otherwise they would think that it is one issue, but in reality, there could be several issues, similar issues in other places. Chen, I'll take a pause here. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, so I think now when it comes to audits, uh, auditors, maybe information systems auditors raise a lot of issues, as you said, and then they and timelines are given for remediation. And I think the CISO has a very important role to play, as you said, in following up to see that they are resolved within the timeline that has been given by the management. But in terms of proactively identifying deficiencies, not waiting for audit to highlight them, what is the role of the CISO in that sense? Because the audit is like a third line of defense,
Defense, absolutely.
But I think CISO has a more proactive role, no, to quickly identify.
Absolutely. So that is where, Ashen, I mean, going back to your earlier observation, the CISOs can't be purely technical. They need to understand the business. They need to understand the process. Now, most of the time when we have our own conversations when I do the meetings with you, one of the things what we always do is we try and understand the process, isn't it? What is the process? And it is never a technical discussion. It is in terms of understanding, okay, how do you do this transaction? How is it done? What are the controls you're putting in? What are the preventive controls, detective controls? And then you actually look at more from a technical perspective. So the CISOs will have to transform themselves to understand the business. And that is the same observation which is made by Steve as well, the first ever CISO as well. So he's saying it is more, yeah, go ahead, Dasha.
Yeah. Because I think if the audit has found an observation, that means in a sense the CISO has failed. Is it in a sense? I mean, of course, you cannot expect the CISO to find all lapses and deficiencies, but if auditors come and find issues which the CISO should have found out, proactively put in place measures. Getting so many observations in an audit could be indicative that the CISO is not playing the role well, or what is your take on that?
Yes and no, Ashin. It's very subjective. Yeah, it's very subjective, right? I mean, sometimes the auditors, because they've been to multiple clients, multiple environments, they have a better appreciation of what is happening in other parts of the world or in other instances. So they can bring that experience and say, hey, this is something you probably are not looking at. So can you have a look at this? Right. So the CISO may not be privy to or aware of that. Now, one of the things which I always do for myself is whenever I hear about a breach or when there is an incident elsewhere, I ask myself, okay, what really happened? Can I learn something out of it? And then look internally to ask ourselves, where are we on these things? Sometimes we won't get answers, right? So that might be an indication either they have no knowledge about it or they are doing it, but they don't know how to explain. Right. So it is a yes/no answer, right? And I think And I think it is very important for people to appreciate the auditors, right? I mean, because most of the time people think auditors are here to find fault. No, that's not the intent, right? The intent is to improve the defenses or, improve the controls. Because now one of the things we always find, Ashane, when we do audits or reviews, there could be certain processes which may be put in place, or certain APIs, if I were to use a technical word, or a connector for that instance. Or sometimes you may have used a specific system account to do something. But after some time, that particular application may be decommissioned, but that identity is still active. So what does it point to? It points to a couple of things, right? Do we have a process which actually checks at all these things? And sometimes that's where the auditors come in, right? And when we go for audits, we look at, okay, who are all the people who are on the rolls? Who are all the people who have left? So we take the names of list of people who have left the organization and then check to see whether their IDs are still active. So we do this for the humans, but we may not be doing this for non-human identities. Right? In many of the incidents which you keep hearing around the world, because you find there's an identity, username, and a password embedded in the application. Right? So the bad guys, all they have to do is uncover that, decrypt, and make use of it.
So it's in the
So the
code.
role,
It's in the code.
it's in the code.
That's what
It's
you're
in the
saying.
code. Yes. Right. So if sometimes this might be a very old application as well. And people may have not even paid attention. And some of the processes in some of the organization may happen once a quarter or once a year. Right. So they may not even notice it, right? So that is where the auditors come in, right? And we can't be looking at auditors as the bad guys who come to, find fault. No. We need to look at them and proactively say, okay, the auditors are here to add value. As long as we take that approach, and I think it's a win-win. But if we get to a stage where we are going to point fingers and blame each other, then it's not going to be good at all. It's not healthy for the organization at all. Right? So I'm just going to move on, right? And then the board
Sujit,
also, yes, yeah, Indika, go ahead.
we have received one question a little early than we expected
It's
from
okay.
a participant.
Sure, go ahead.
Basically, question is that more oftenly CISOs would take decisions and control will be activated, not considering business advantages or business enablement. So
Yep.
how CISOs can basically avoid this situation? Basically, I think this touches your slides, the last point, business enablement.
Yes, absolutely. It is more to become business aware, process aware, right? And several organizations may not even have process flows. When I talk about process flow, swimlet diagrams, right? I mean, when I go back to my internal audit classes, that's one thing which we talk about, right? Process documentation. So process horizontal and vertical, and who approves what. And when they don't have that or identify the dependencies or the data flows, some of this can be actually blind to a person. May they not even notice it. So when they don't notice it, now sometimes I've seen places, right? They say, okay, how many people are using this particular thing? Oh, we don't know. Where is it being used? We don't know. So there are two choices to make. Do we allow it to go? But there's a risk. Something happens, we don't know how it would impact. But some places what they do is they shut it down. And they take this attitude saying, okay, if people don't make noise, so that means it's not needed. If somebody is making noise, then we know that it is required. And then you identify the community which is impacted by it, right? That's on a lighter note, but I think the CISO has a huge role to understand the business and the processes. And this becomes even more important, especially on a merger and acquisition. I think when the central bank had this program to um, get all the finance companies, merged with a larger bank. And that's one of the things which people did, right? I mean, auditors, that's what we did, right? And try and understand what processes they'd had and how the technology would actually merge with the other organization. Because sometimes you bring in a new process or a new technology that introduces a new risk to that organization, which otherwise did not have. So moving on, so incident response, right? So knowing what to do in the event of a response. Now, all of us are very familiar with a fire drill. So all of us know when there is a fire, what to do. But if you go and ask the guy who is seated next to a fire extinguisher, what would you do in case of a fire? He would look at you blank. It could be a new employee, or it could be a person who never was in any of the trainings. I remember in one of my audit engagement, I asked, what would you do in case of a fire? He said, I would run. And he's the guy closest to sitting next to the fire extinguisher and the break glass. That was not the answer, right? So when we asked him, he was a new employee. He was not trained. So I think it is important for us also to demonstrate as CISOs to the boards, if there is a ransomware scenario, what would you do? Who would you call? How would you handle? How would you respond? Now, that's the biggest challenge for all of us, right? Because some of these things are new to everyone. So we can't even visualize, we can't even feel how it would actually impact our organizations. Right? I mean, if you go and ask a lot of people, oh, there might be an attack, cyber attack on you, or no, it will not happen. Most of the time they would say, not most of the 99% of the time they would say it will never happen.
Mm.
It
There's
may
a
not be
very
even
interesting.
headlines.
There's a very, very interesting. Sorry to
Sure,
interrupt.
go ahead,
Question:
Ashin.
if can a CISO truly be effective if the CIO controls the budget?
Yes, as long as he is able to make a case using risk management or risk assessment. Right. So interesting question, Ashin, right? If the CISO is directly reporting to the CIO, then he's going to be governed and directed by the CIO. So that's the agenda he would actually fall into. But let's say if he has dual reporting, that if he has the opportunity to meet the board and explain to them, then there is a dialogue, right? So then automatically that conversation would take place. So the biggest challenge for most organization is to transition from the traditional way of operating to this new way of operating. And also, to have that conversation. Most of the time, if it is a technology discussion, people are a little shy to talk or even ask questions. And you ask a technical guy a simple question, you would get an answer, maybe 2, 3 paragraphs or 3 full step papers of answers, right? So that's also an aversion for people, right? So they don't want to hear long stories. So how do we translate? So one of the things I do is storytelling. I share experiences. I would say, hey, this happened to so and so. This is what happened, and this is what the consequences was. And the first next question, follow-up question will be, how about us? Then you are in a position to say, okay, we've done 1, 2, 3, but the 4, I think there's something we have opportunity to improve. What does it take to do? So automatically gets into that conversation, right? Then they might say, okay, if you have the number in your mind, you can say, okay, it's going to cost so much, but this is the advantage we would get. If you have not done that work, then you can always say, let me go back, let me do the analysis and come back and present to you. So I think it's keeping that conversation going is very important. And then, of course, we discussed the last point where it is all about ensuring business enablement, right? Friction free, right? That's how I would say. Right. I mean, I found this cartoon. I guess this is a question, right? How many organizations have a CISO? Or are we still finding answers, or are we still debating whether we need a CISO? So on this slide, right, I mean, I would like to talk about three flavors of CISOs: a strategic CISO, a functional CISO, a technical CISO. What is the hat you're wearing today? If you're a technical CISO, you're more in terms of prevention, solutions, and your conversation is going to be more technical. You're going to be talking about TCP/IP, packet filters, or DNS, or things like that. Functional guys are probably, it's a mix where they're going to be talking about compliance, checklist, have you done this, have you done that kind of thing. But a strategic CISO is going to be talking business, process, risk to the board. So he's going to be aligning the controls in line with the business plans. So it would be good to have a CISO who has these three flavors, but it's a rare.
But
Sometimes,
CISOs don't take part in these strategic decisions. They don't get a
correct.
seat at that table. It's a CIO sometimes who gets seat.
Correct. So Ashin, the question we need to ask is, okay, it's true they don't get a seat at the table. Why is that they don't get a seat at the table? Is it because they are too technical, or they lack the business knowledge? Is that the reason, or is it something else?
So
So
I suppose in one sense it could be that they are not senior enough in the
correct.
hierarchy. So they
Absolutely.
are not they don't get that seat. The other aspect could be, as you said, they are not business savvy. They are too much. They're functioning as technical CISOs rather than enabling business growth and innovation and giving some sort of an input into that.
Absolutely. So our challenge, Ashin, for all of us is how do we bridge this gap? We talk about talent shortage. We talk about skill development, skill gap. But this is a serious gap, right? How do we enable organizations to groom their people? And in some cases, I mean, I've come across people where they say, "Oh, we don't need qualified people." But for me personally, it's a qualification. The certification we have has enabled us to perform at this level. It is important, right? I mean, it helps us to understand the technology, it helps us to understand the controls, and we are able to relate it to the processes, right? So those of you who are still contemplating to pursue a certification, I encourage you to, you know, invest in a certification. It's very, very important. Go ahead, Indika.
Yeah, Sujit, I would add this to develop your conversation further, because if I ask the question on behalf of the attendees here, if somebody wants to pursue CISO journey to the highest level, and looking at the integrations happening with the business technology and policy levels, how should I get ready? Out of these participants, we may have a number of enthusiastic people who wants to jump to the CISO role and go up. So my question to you is, if you can elaborate 3 to 4 points, how
Yes.
how an individual can go through this journey. You mentioned about certifications. Any more 3 to 4 points
Oh,
would
yes,
be
of course. There's some
better.
things which we share as well, right? I think we all need mentors. We all need human heroes as well, right? So how do
Exactly.
we role model? And that's something I think all of us can play a role, right? Having those conversations, learning from each other, right? I mean, I do that. And I also reach out to people who are experts in the industry, and I share scenarios, seek their advice. Sometimes people come and ask you. So I keep that channel open, right? And I think we all do that, right? Because so it's the learning is mutual. So you will learn something which you don't experience day to day, but you're learning from somebody else. So that is very important. And you got to keep reading, right? You got to keep up to date with what's happening in the world. It's not limiting to technology. There's so much geopolitics, politics, right? Sometimes climate change. All these also comes in. right? Because sometimes your organization is doing something, but it might have a climate impact, ESG. So if you look at the ESG, there also you have a component for cybersecurity. So how can you help? Now, one of the things I always tell people is it's no point talking about ESG when your users are not shutting down the machines when they leave for the day. So one from a carbon footprint perspective, the other one is from a safety aspect, right? The devices which we use are meant to be used only for a limited time. It's not a server which runs 24/7. So it's on throughout. Sometimes they don't even press that button to say restart, so the patches get updated. So all these things, right? Little things we can learn from each other, right? So for me, to recap, mentoring or find a mentor who can actually guide you through. Second, definitely you need to embark on a certification. It's a must. There's no debate on that. And third, attend as many webinars, such programs, and hear from different people, different perspectives. Shin, do you want to share anything? I mean,
Yeah,
from
there are a
that.
few questions. Sujit, if you, is it all
Yeah,
right if I just post it, appearing in the chat? So
okay.
as future forward security leaders, how can CISOs evolve from being blockers of risk to enablers of smart risk? Because you see, risk has a upside to it as well.
Yeah,
Sometimes when companies face certain types of risks, it's an opportunity as well. So the upside of it can be exploited and you could profit off that. So where
absolutely.
security becomes a strategic partner, not just a safety net. So so that's a question.
Absolutely.
How can
So
CISO? Yeah, go ahead.
correct. So Ashin, I mean, we can never say there'll be 100% security. If we go on that basis, what is the residual risk you're willing to accept? And what have you done to minimize or have those guardrails in place so that it doesn't go and impact other things? That's the conversation the board expects you to have. Saying, okay, we can go ahead and do this. Like, for example, you may say you want to launch a new application. So what are the guardrails you're putting in place to minimize the risk? So I would say strong authentication, right? Place it behind a firewall. And if it is in the cloud, what protections you need to do. So if you go through the checklist, you can say, hey, this is good to go. If you have PII data, then you probably want to think twice. Okay, I have data which if exposed, I might have a situation which I need to face. So what guardrails are you putting to protect that information? So if you take that approach, you can take a staged approach. I would like to share on the same conversation, I mean, about a conversation I had yesterday evening with an IT person. I think you may treat him as a head of IT. And they're planning to launch an application, and he wanted to integrate with a specific system, right? And it was an incentive which they wanted to give to their employees. So the question we asked is, why do you need to connect? Because the moment you connect to an internal platform, you're creating so many dependencies and you're also exposing. So can you do this in the cloud silo, connect it to a payment gateway? You have your inventory in the cloud and you do it. So even if something happens, it's contained there. So it's about looking at those scenarios, permutation combinations. You can actually decide whether it is worth doing it or not. I mean, there's another question, right?
Yes, but Anusha has given. Uh, if you get Anusha Cabral is talking
Yeah,
about how CISOs can be strategic if they have knowledge about process optimization, understanding business objectives and risk management. That is all part of their scope of work of
absolutely,
CISOs. So on top of that, if they have business or domain knowledge, I suppose they could be strategic.
absolutely. Functional and technical could be ticked off to such a CISO. Yeah, yes. And the most important thing is These roles are not static. Every day there's something new. So are these people willing to keep updating themselves? That's the biggest challenge. It's not about what they know, it's about what they don't know and how they're going to get to know that in the shortest possible time. So that's where the challenge arises. And going back to my earlier slide, let me bring that slide up. Uh, this one, transparency and truth. So one of the things I always practice, if I don't know something, I'd always tell them I don't know. I'll come back to you. I'll find out and come back. I won't give an answer to satisfy that moment. So anyone who is there in front of you, they would also appreciate that. Yeah, in the short term, they may feel, oh, this guy doesn't know about it. But what you build over a period of time is the confidence that you will say what is right and what is not. So I think every board member would want to hear from anyone, especially in the technology front, is how transparent and how truthful they are to build that confidence in the process.
So we have Sanath also in the call. Sanath, would you like to ask any questions? So we can proceed to the presenters. I think he's staying on the call. Well, go ahead, Sujit. We are running out of time as well. I think I
And
can
so
give a few more slides.
that's about it, right?
That's about it. All right.
Yeah. So if you have any questions, and I think this is a take-home slide for you, are we secure enough for our risk appetite? And if not, what actions do we need to take? And you will keep discovering.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
Ashin, you.
CISOs will also have to maintain their own risk registers, I suppose, no risk assessments. And they are not cast in stone. They're kind of, every day you'll have to keep updating.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And I would always encourage to consolidate all risks in one place, because sometimes you may be talking about something else. Now, I mean, one of the things which I can share is, I mean, I was having a conversation about risk with a larger organization in Sri Lanka, and they were building a new warehouse, and they were very excited about it. I had only one question: how many of you have visited this particular location? And their responses were, why, how does it matter? The warehouse is already up and running. I said, please visit, talk to the neighbors, find out what the environment looks like. Does that place get flooded?
Right.
So sometimes you may not have the data in a textbook, but you talk to the people living there, they might tell you. And guess what? 2 months later, there were severe rains. This warehouse went underwater. Millions of stock was destroyed. Now you may ask, okay, what has that got to do with a CISO? But you need to know which is the low-lying area and what investments are you making. Let's say you may have a new office coming up. You may, decide to have certain IT functions or technology placed in that location. So you need to be aware of that. Ashin, you were trying to ask me something.
Yeah, because what I also think is that, CROs, chief risk officers, are that tech savvy. So the CISO has a big role to play in helping CROs also identify risks. More are now falling under the category of digital risks, or cyber risks.
Absolutely.
And I think when new products and services are launched, or you're going to expand into a new geography, CISO also, I think, should sign off on that. We see that CRO and the CFO and all of them involved in that, but not the CISO. So we have a few more questions. We'll just take those and then.
So Ashin, on the CRO, right? I mean, I would like to pose this question to all of you who are logged into this call. Is it still relevant to call it Chief Information Security Officer? Or should we change the title to Chief Information Risk Officer? I mean, this is not coming from me, right? I mean, I was reading about the interviews or listening to the interviews which Steve had given. And he had said in one of the interviews that the chief information security officer is no longer relevant. It's not about security, it's about risk management. So
That is.
information and risk.
What about this idea of a chief digital risk officer? They say, will emerging roles like chief digital risk officer help bridge the CIO CISO divide? What is the
It,
role in user awareness? CISO's role in user awareness and training. And the last one, can a CISO truly be effective? Okay, so those two questions on the training aspect and the chief digital risk officer. Any thoughts on that, Sujit?
so I mean, we can call it anything, right? But what matters is what is their key responsibilities? What are they accountable for? Designation doesn't matter, right? So I mean, even if I were to take an example in the finance industry or a person who is in finance, how does it differ in terms of a financial controller to an accountant or a finance director? Right? Sometimes you might find they have these different titles, but in their responsibility, they are all signing off in the financial statements, right? So I think that's what matters, right? In terms of what would they do in their roles. So that's what I would be concerned about. And in terms of the awareness, the CISOs should be practical. It's not about, I mean, one of the things I always do is I don't go and talk about a policy saying, hey, we have this policy, you're not supposed to do that. I strongly oppose that. I always say, don't tell people not to do anything. You tell them how they would actually benefit by doing something. So it's actually presenting a positive message to the end users than telling them don't do, because nobody likes to be told not to do anything. I think when you were a kid, what was your reaction to your parents if they said not to do something?
Yeah. Natural instinct to just do it.
Yeah. And I'm sure Indika, your kids, if you tell them what not to do something, what do? Exactly the
First
same thing, right?
choice.
Maybe not in your
You,
presence, but when you disappear from the scene, they would do the same thing, right? So
They'll
that's
go
a
and ask the
human.
mother. They'll go and ask the mother. That's what they'll do.
Yeah, correct. So that's what happens in a human psychology, right? So I think it's very important for the CISOs to understand the human behavior. Writing a policy saying don't do all these things is easier. So my biggest challenge I have is how do I convey these don'ts in a positive manner so that I have the best result I can get? Did I miss any other questions?
Um, why do we always understand information security to be related to IT? And see the CISO to be an IT techo guy. So that's how CISOs are seen. I think this is the question
Yeah,
that you also said. It should be more risk and more
more
business.
risk because more business and the CISOs are expected, right, to have that conversation with the business.
Mm.
But typically, you don't find the people in the IT having that conversation with the business. The only time they would appear is when there is a tech support issue. They pop in, resolve, and they disappear. Or they have a call. That's it.
So how can they develop that skill? What advice would you give to a CISO who has the technical knowledge but not business savvy, does not
Spend
have
more spend more time with the business. Sit
more time
down,
with the business?
understand. Yes, right, and try and understand. Now, sometimes, I mean, I'll give you this example, Shin. It was shared by a friend of mine, a Canadian who's a CISO, and he does a lot of work with the defense, the US and the Canadian defense. So he was doing an audit for the one of the defense organizations, and the observation was the door to the data center was kept open. Not just open, they had taken the fire extinguisher and kept it as a door stopper. Audit observation. The door was not locked. So the chief of the department, he said, okay, fantastic finding. I accept it. But before you put it in the report, please do it 100 times and then do it. So we'll lock the door, we'll get you registered in the system. So you do this 100 times in a day, and then you write the report. Like it goes back to the earlier one, right? So are we going to be stoppers or are we going to be enablers? And the example I gave you, right? How many times you would get somebody to log in and authenticate. So that profiling, that calibration has to happen. So the CISOs have to become more business aware while they are also technical people.
Last final question.
Go
What
ahead.
are the top skills that you recommend a CISO should possess with the rapid transformation happening with AI, spatial and quantum computing? It's very
Communication.
vast. Yeah.
Communication skills, right? Number one, communication. Number two, communication. Number three, communication. Right? Make it simple, make it easier for the board to understand.
So that
Everything
includes
else,
negotiation and convincing skills as
everything,
well.
yeah,
Like
conflict
team.
management, everything, yes. So the soft skills, I would say that they need to work on. I think we have a lot of opportunities, Ashen, for us to, put something together,
Yes.
maybe a forum to even have, maybe mentorship programs where they can, call a friend and say, hey, I have this. I mean, we don't have to, share confidential details, but if they describe the scenario, then we can, in confidence, we can advise. I mean, that's one way of doing it. And then, of course, running soft skill programs and various other things are definitely useful for them.
So let's, on that thought, Sujit, I think let's start a mentorship program or some sort of a forum where these sort of ideas can be exchanged.
Absolutely.
Certainly look forward to doing that with you and your association.
Yeah.
I want to thank Sujit for consenting on such short notice as well. In coming today and then presenting to you and sharing all this. I would also like to thank our VP, Dika, and all the participants who have taken time off on this Friday. So our next session in our series will be on the 2nd of May. We have the CISO of HNB who will talk on the topic of translating tech risk into business risk. Few areas where I think we've touched on that as well, but I believe Suresh will go in depth and delve into that topic. That will be on the 2nd of May. So with that, I would like to conclude today's session. Thank you very much for joining us and look forward to seeing you on the 2nd. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sujit. Thanks, Indrika.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine.
Thank you
Thanks
all.
for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.